I need to tell you guys this ghost story. This is not like any other ghost story that I've read before. Haunted by a ghost that wants a romantic bond with me. As a person who loves the paranormal, supernatural, unexplained world, but also loves reading books, I didn't think that I would ever come to a point in my life where these two things would genuinely intersect. I mean, this entire scenario is something that you would open up the Tipsy app, type this little thing on there, paranormal romance, ghost boyfriend, my hot sleep paralysis demon, and then spend a little bit of time kind of curating your own cute little story, talking to your imaginary ghost boyfriend, or you could just be friendly if that's what you're into. But I genuinely, when I read this title, I was like, oh, my worlds are colliding. I think a ghost might be romantically attached to me. Since late September of this year, I have been dealing with a series of really strange events, and it's starting to feel like a spirit slash ghost slash something might be trying to connect with me in a romantic slash sexual way. So this is genuinely one of my paranormal romance books come to life. I'm not. One time after playing the song I Wanna a Ghost, I had an intense, uncontrollable physical reaction. My Bluetooth headphones have connected by themselves. Headphones that I literally never use and haven't seen in ages. And Spotify Shuffle keeps playing love songs, even from playlists that aren't romantic. When I used my tarot deck with a friend, the cards gave incredibly fitting responses, like the Lovers and the High Priestess, right after we joked about the spirit being romantically interested in me. This is genuinely a tipsy chat conversation. There's no other way to put it. Yeah. I mean, kind of cute that a little ghost boyfriend is sending you love songs. Unfortunately, I would be into this. Another thing that happened was that my phone started lagging and freezing up, which isn't abnormal by itself, but it also started typing on its own, while acting completely unresponsive right after I said I needed to go to the store. Not your ghost trying to keep you at home. This seems a little bit toxic. I've also felt touches slash tickles a lot recently, especially in relation to me saying something related to this entity. The thing is telling you I'm right here, okay? That's a little bit nuts. It's like something or someone is aware and interacting with me through tech, tarot, and music. I get that it could be coincidences, but it just kind of feels like too coincidental. I also want to add that these intense coincidences and events started ramping up and happening a lot more blatantly right after I downloaded a dating app and was planning to finally start dating again. Your ghost is jealous. He said, "You're mine." Your ghost said, "Absolutely not. What do you mean? I thought we had something." At this point, I really feel like a spirit wants to be with me romantically, but I'm not sure if this is paranormal or something else. I can't help you out on what this actually is, okay? Because all I can think about is how it's kind of cute to have a ghost boyfriend. My toxic trait is that I think an obsessive little ghost boyfriend is actually kind of cute, okay? If you'd like to try out having an obsessive little ghost boyfriend, you can find yourself over on the Tipsy app, type in a cute little scenario and see what you find. In all seriousness, though, this was posted 2 months ago, and I don't think there's an update, okay? I need to know if you and your ghost are dating at this point. My brain is like, this scenario is kind of having a cute little obsessive ghost boyfriend. There may or may not be a special little link in the description.
Someone or something that I don't think was entirely human while working at a vape shop in 2020. This is Lauren's story. She submitted it to my series Spooky Scary Storytime, which is the series where I share listeners' allegedly true stories about the creepiest or most unbelievable things that they think nobody else would believe. This fits the criteria. I love otherworldly person stories. When I first read this, I was like, oh, it sounds like just a lonely old man who wanted to talk with him. When I got to the ending, I was like, oh. So Lauren says that in 2020, she was laid off from her normal job and she was having all kinds of issues with unemployment. Like the checks just weren't coming in. So she needed money stat. And also at the time, this story takes place, she wasn't really happy with the direction of her life. The job that she had been laid off from was kind of a dead end anyway. She was having all kinds of issues with her friend group, like she didn't feel like they were real friends, and she had been thinking about moving out of state to a different city, a specific city. Lauren said the vape shop job was not ideal, but she needed a job, and they were one of the only places hiring. They weren't super busy, like there wasn't a lot of foot traffic because it's 2020, not a lot of people are out, but they did have a group of regulars that would come in like almost every day or almost every other day. So she saw mostly the same people. At the time, she was also learning how to read tarot cards for herself. Just kind of looking for direction and thought it was relatively harmless. So she would often bring the cards to work with her and sit there and do her own readings while waiting for customers. So this one night, she's at work, she's got her cards out, it's almost closing time, and she hasn't seen a customer in hours. The bell rings, she looks at the door, there's this old man that walks in. He's super tall, he's wearing sunglasses, he walks with a limp and a cane. He walks up to the counter, relatively normal interaction besides the fact that he's wearing sunglasses and it's night out, and he asks if they're selling RDA coils, which she said are coils that you build yourself. She sells him the coils and she sells him some juice. He says, would you mind if I build the coils here? She says, sure, why not? She locks the door because now it's past closing time, and she's like, I have to close up anyway, you're welcome to do it here, and I can answer any questions that you have. Building the coils. I have no idea how long this takes, by the way. I'm not familiar with this specific product. But anyway, she's sitting there, she's looking at her cards, he's building the coils on the counter, and he looks over, he sees her cards, and he says, oh, I used to read cards, but I stopped in the 80s. He says, up until I stopped, any deck I touched became my own. And she was like, well, why'd you stop? And he said, one day I was crossing the street and I saw a man with a black hole for a face, and I never touched the cards again. She's like, okay. And she just continues doing her drop or whatever she's doing with the register. He continues building the coils. And then he stops and he looks up at her and he's like, I see that you have a light in you that a lot of other people are trying to put out. And she was like, this was oddly specific to what I was going through at the time. Like I had just had this big fight with my friends. It's like, it just seemed spot on for what I was going through. But I thought it was just, I was reading my cards and he picked up on that. But then he says, you should continue with your move to specific city. That he mentioned the city by name. She was absolutely shocked because she hadn't mentioned it. Like he didn't know her. She had never seen this man before. Also, he's still wearing his sunglasses. So she says, how did you know that I was thinking about moving to that city? And he just says, I can just tell that you were meant for other things. She said she can't really explain it, but she did feel this sense of like peace and calm being around this man. Didn't say much else, but he finishes what he's doing and then he stands straight up, taps his cane on the ground 3 times and says, I give you my light. He holds out his hand, he thanks her, and then he walks straight to the door that she had previously locked after closing the store. Walks out, but as he does, he says, the door is open for you. She finishes closing up. She's like, that was a strange interaction, but whatever. A week later, her unemployment that she had been waiting on for like weeks or months comes in. She also decides that she is going to continue on with her move to the other city. When she tells her boss that she's giving this 2 weeks notice, her boss is like, why are you leaving? And then she decides she's going to tell her boss about this strange interaction. And her boss is like, oh, I wonder if he's a regular. Like, I wonder if I know him. So they look at the cameras. Nobody on the cameras. She was just standing at the register talking to no one for an hour. She also said that there was no transaction in the register for the time frame that he bought those coils and that juice. I don't have any reason to believe that I hallucinated this man. I don't have any history of that. But I don't know who he was, but he changed the course of my life and I think he was a good thing. So let her know your thoughts if you have any idea of who this man was or why he appeared to her. If you have a story that you think nobody else would believe, feel free to send it in. We would love to hear it.
Let's read another true scary story. If you're new here, I'm Krista, and on my account we talk about weird events, paranormal story times, and everything in between. So if you're interested in that genre of content, be sure to give me a follow. I moved around a lot as a kid. We were the kind of family that would have boxes that would always go unopened and undisturbed between moves. My dad was a good guy but had an issue with authority, so he usually had issues keeping a stable job for more than a year or so. When the lease was up, we'd move closer to his new job. Anyways, during one of these moves, my dad found a steal next to his job. It was an old 2-bed, 1-bath house with a detached garage. I want to say it was around $300 a month for rent in 2003. Apparently, it was a rough part of town. The landlord told us, I won't go into specifics, but I'm required to tell you that someone passed away in the house within the last 5 years. My dad saw a great deal and shrugged it off. We moved in soon after, and things started very quickly. There were noises in the house all the time. It was like we had other people living there. It would generally be noises that you'd expect when other people were around. Things like drawers opening and closing, doors swinging around on their own, water turning on in the bathroom and then back off. Nothing malicious was happening, so we just lived with it. Another weird quirk about the house was that the front door had a keyhole on both sides, so you could not leave the locked house unless you had the keys. You can probably guess where this is going, but not a week or so after we moved in, we lost the keys. Boxes still littered the house, and we were still in unpacking hell. So my dad, obviously stressed from the whole situation, started getting loud about the keys. He accused me of stealing them, he was cursing and being a general pain. Then out of nowhere, we hear the keys hit the floor in the living room right in front of the couch, right onto the floor. He picks them up, tries to rationalize what just happened, says F it, and leaves the house for work. Over the next few months, the stupid keys are the center of the activity. My dad would put them in a glass bowl every day after work, and somehow they would be moved by the morning. My favorite spot by far was when we found them in a sealed box of pots and pans that we needed to unpack. It had those little handle holes on the side of the box, and it's like someone just shoved them into the hole out of spite. We all got a good laugh out of that one. Right now you're probably like, okay, what's spine-chilling about some noises and some keys moving around? Well, here you go. The worst thing that happened fairly frequently was the stomping. Most nights around 2 to 3 a.m., there would be very heavy footsteps pacing in the hallway outside of our bedrooms. I confirmed with my dad when I was older that yes, it kind of freaked him out too. We'd been living in this place for about 8 months at this point, and I was probably around 8 years old. I heard the stomping one night and I just couldn't take it. I screamed out into the hallway, "Stop stomping around, I need to sleep." 15 seconds of silence was abruptly interrupted by what sounded like a bull running full speed into my room. Then my door had 3 very aggressive slamming knocks, one after the other. It was so loud my dad woke up and came to check on me. My stomach started to turn and I suddenly felt like I had to use the toilet. I was frozen in bed when I heard my dad call out to me, "You okay, buddy?" from his bedroom. I mustered up the courage to head out to the hallway. As I got up, I could tell something wasn't right. I was shaking like a leaf and my bowels were trying to evacuate while I was walking. I ran as fast as I could to the toilet, but it did not help. There was a trail from about halfway between my bedroom and the toilet, and my poor dad, worried about my safety, followed me into the bathroom to figure out what the hell just happened. I explained everything, crying on the toilet, making a mess of myself in the house. I was embarrassed and terrified. After this, my dad told me, "If you ever feel uncomfortable, you can come sleep in my room. Nothing can bug you when I'm around." The final straw came a week later. My dad had been dating a girl for over a year, and she'd been staying with us more. One of the nights she stayed over, they had a really minor fight right before bed. I think it was about cleaning/chores. Anyway, they both went to bed grumpy about it. Right around that magic 2 to 3 a.m. mark, his girlfriend got yanked out of bed by one of her ankles and got dragged out of the bedroom and down the hallway. By her account, she woke up after she was on the floor and felt someone pulling on her leg, and it took her a while to realize exactly what was happening. She shrieked, and whatever it was let go. She ran back into the bedroom and turned the lights on and explained the whole thing to my dad. He sent me off to an aunt's house and stayed in the house alone for a few months while looking for another place to go. Figured it would be safer without me there. During the packing and moving out of the house, my dad had some friends swing by and keep him company while he packed. Almost everyone who came by to help mentioned that they saw a small white dog walking around right when they entered the house. Yeah, that place was haunted as fuck. I still think about it from time to time. Wonder if the people who live there now deal with the same stuff or if it's all calmed down. And they have a bonus extra story. My dad's girlfriend had brought a yoga ball to the house, and as a rambunctious 8-year-old, I wanted to play with it all the time. She tells me I can play with it, but I have to be careful. So we lightly toss it back and forth down the hallway. After a minute or two, I toss the ball and it freezes mid-air before it makes it to her and comes right back to me. She was mortified. I was too young to realize what happened, and she didn't want to freak out her boyfriend's 8-year-old son, so she quickly just said she didn't want to play with it anymore, and we went and did something else. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. The pulling of the ankles from the bed, that's like the classic, exorcism sort of situation. I think if they did have this information, they would have probably said something, but I wonder who the person was who died in that house. I wonder what happened to them and if it was related to the haunted incidents or whether or not they were the person that was haunting the house. As always, if you have a story you'd like me to read, be sure to message me or comment it down below, and I will see you in the next one.
This isn't my story, but my dad's, and it stayed with me ever since he told me. This story takes place in Veracruz, Mexico. For some background, my grandpa, my dad's father, was in the Mexican military. He had a very machista mindset. He believed boys shouldn't cry, shouldn't be afraid, and that fear was only for girls. One day, when my dad was around 10 years old, he did something that made my grandpa extremely angry. As punishment, my grandpa told him they were going to a town. My dad didn't know where they were going, only that he was told to pack a small bag. Then they left. My dad said they walked for about an hour to a town he had never seen before, despite living in the area his whole life. By the time they arrived, the sun was beginning to set. My grandpa said they needed to find a home or apartment that was high up. The town looked completely abandoned, like a ghost town. Buildings were covered in graffiti, windows were broken, and many structures were destroyed. Fog rolled through the streets. He couldn't see his feet or where he was stepping, but my grandpa kept pushing forward. Eventually, they found an abandoned apartment building and climbed to the highest floor, floor 5. This floor had no doors, no walls, and no windows. It was like a massive open space, similar to an empty tennis court. There were a few boxes scattered around, all covered in graffiti. The floor had a roof and cement balcony walls, allowing them to lean over and look down at the town below. My dad was terrified of heights, but he still looked over the edge. That's when my grandpa told him why he brought him there. He said my dad needed to become a man and learn not to be afraid. This was his punishment for making him angry earlier. As the sun fully disappeared, the air began to change. Everything felt off. Darkness settled in, and all my dad could see was fog covering the ground below. At some point during the night, my dad fell asleep, but he was suddenly awakened by the sound of heavy scratching coming from below. That's when my grandpa quietly said, "Ya están aquí." They're here. My dad slowly walked to the balcony and peeked down. The fog in one area lifted, revealing a person standing alone. Then, before his eyes, the person transformed into a massive black wolf with bright yellow eyes. My grandpa stood beside him, watching. "Eso es un nahual," my grandpa whispered. A nahual is a shapeshifter, someone who can transform into animals like wolves, jaguars, or owls. They're often described as either protectors or malevolent sorcerers who use their powers to harm or steal, especially from children.
Let's read some more scary Reddit stories. I had one experience that still creeps me out to this day. I was staying in an old cabin in the woods with a few friends, and one night around 3 a.m., we heard faint knocking on the windows. The weird part, the cabin was in the middle of nowhere. No neighbors, no roads nearby. At first we thought it was just the wind or an animal, but then the knocking started moving. First on one window, then another, as if someone or something was circling the cabin. When we finally got the courage to check outside with a flashlight, no one was there. No footprints, no signs of anything. We barely slept that night. And to this day, none of us can explain what happened. Maybe it was just our imaginations, or maybe we weren't alone. I live in Utah, and this happened 2 autumns ago. My friend Mia and I walked to a park about 2 miles away at sunset. We did this often because we both were 15 and couldn't drive. We got to the park, and the sun was already down. This park has a wooded area with a parking lot. In the parking lot, a group of boys drove by and chased us around. We ended up hiding on the other side of this tunnel near the path we went under to get to the park. After about 10 minutes, we went back to the park to see the boys had left and the parking lot was empty. We were pretty scared, so we ended up going back under the tunnel to head on the path home. The path was up this long hill and then through this empty field. As we made our way through the tunnel, it had a dimly lit light in the center. We got up the tall hill and looked back. As we did, both of our stomachs dropped. I had never felt this way before. A black figure stood at the bottom of the tunnel, walking in place, like standing there and just moving its legs to look like it was walking. Again, the figure was all black and had no features on its face or anything, just a black figure. We both turned to each other and sprinted. We got to the other side of the field and we looked back. The moonlight showed the figure standing there staring at us. There is actually no way this thing could have gotten up the hill that fast. This was a steep, long hill, with us 2 girls sprinting by adrenaline to get to the other side of the field, and this thing somehow got to the top of the hill at the same time. Mia and I ended up sprinting into a random neighborhood and then found our way home. Her and I are neighbors, so I headed home. The pit in our stomachs didn't leave for 24 hours. We told our friend, and she said it's probably a Skiggly Wiggly. Please let me know what you think it is. It's been 2 years, and I still feel unsettled by it. One day, I was with my friend in an abandoned house that was a recently unfinished construction. We decided to use it to smoke since we were teenagers and our parents couldn't find out. We heard some footsteps, but nobody was there. The atmosphere felt weird, but the day passed. The next day we went back again, and we heard something once more. We checked and saw a lady with a baby carrier, but something wasn't right. She was dressed in a way that looked like she belonged in the 1800s, the same style you see in old movies. We ran, and then we saw a man who looked like a gardener, but from the same time period as the lady. We ran away and never went back there. Many years later, while talking to my brother, he told me that when he was a teenager, he's 7 years older than me, in his friend group there were 4 girls who were experimenting with witchcraft. One day they decided to go to the basement of the same house my friend and I had been to and do some invocations. So they all held hands with candles on, and the witches said the same thing 3 times. At that moment, all the candles went out and the door slammed really hard. Since they were all holding hands, it was not a prank, and they ran for their lives. So now my brother and I think they opened some sort of portal. One of our friends also broke a leg in that place while running from someone. He didn't tell us if he saw something, but after sharing these stories, we both believe it's too big of a coincidence.
Indiana is a paranormal hotspot. There have been multiple UFO sightings, poltergeist activity, cryptids. Almost every inch of Indiana has some sort of lore or legend. Now, this is a story that comes out of the Turkey Run area. One night, there was this group of teenagers, and they happened to be driving down this very heavily forested area. Now, this particular stretch of road, the trees actually go over the road, and you cannot see up to the sky, and it gets pretty dark. As they're driving this windy road through the woods, they began to get this weird feeling like they were being watched, and they felt very uncomfortable. And that's when they noticed up ahead in the road there was something hanging from the tree. So they slowed down, and as they got a little closer, they could see this was some sort of like humanoid creature, and it had a glowing head. And they said that at first, they thought it was some sort of Halloween decoration that someone had hung from a tree. But as they got a little closer, this thing turned its head and looked at them. So they were panicked. They didn't know what to do. They push on the accelerator and they start trying to go under this thing. But as they get within 10 feet of this thing, their car stalls out and they cannot move. And they see this thing hover down from the trees, and it opened its mouth wide, and it started to move towards their vehicle. And they said the next thing they remember is that it was 3 hours later, and they were all in their car, and it was almost like they had went into some sort of trance, and they had no idea what had happened. And when they looked out in front of the vehicle, there was a huge burn mark on the road. And none of them could recall what had happened that night. And still to this day, they do not like to drive at night, especially in that area.
This is called Birthday Boy. Before I tell my tale, you need some context. When I was young, my family were heavily Christian, making me spend my Sundays at service and Wednesdays at youth group. I'm not religious now, but those years instilled an awareness of the paranatural in me. As I grew up, I became more independent and rebellious, leading me to seek out forms of psychedelic spiritual enlightenment. It just so happened that I deemed that a priority over having a place to stay. As a young adult hooligan living in a small farm town in the middle of Willamette Valley, there weren't a lot of opportunities for kids my age. You either partook in substances, worked in the wine industry, or got involved in the numerous cults around. It was about 10 p.m. as my friend and I were bumming smokes from patrons behind the local bar. There were about 5 people, my friend and I excluded, and we were all a bit tipsy, sharing tales and shooting the crap when a man walked out that I'd never seen before. He was about 5.5 feet tall, with odd proportions, a burly moustache that did not fit his face. He wore a cowboy hat 2 sizes too big, a leather jacket over a plain white tank top, leather pants, and boots to finish off his outfit. He kind of just stood there, trying to be a part of the group. After about 10 minutes of loitering, he started talking. He mentioned it was his birthday and referred to himself as the birthday boy. On and on, he would only talk about how it was his birthday, that he needed a cigarette because it was his birthday, that someone should buy him a drink for his birthday. I'm pretty sure it was his birthday.
Yeah.
30 minutes passed, and the patrons slowly started filtering out until it was just the birthday boy, my friend, and I. He asked us if we knew where any abandoned buildings were and if we could take him to one. I was already unnerved, but at this point my entire being was screaming at me to get away from him. Like a switch had flipped and I could feel some sort of evil intention radiating from him. I gave a sort of vague direction of a non-existent building and told him goodbye. He asked me if I would take him there and celebrate his birthday with him, and that he had gifts for us. I told him no, as I needed to make it to a friend's house to go to sleep. He told me, and I quote, "I'll see you again, Noah," and gave a huge inhuman grin. He then proceeded to sprint backwards for about 30 feet. Yes, backwards. Spin around and run in the direction I gave him. I looked at my friend and we both started running in the opposite direction, cutting through side streets and jumping a couple of fences. We ended up making it to my friend's house and making it inside. About 20 minutes pass, we're chilling inside and smoking, and I hear someone singing, "Happy birthday." I peek out the window and it's the birthday boy. I don't know how he found us, but he paced up and down the street for an hour or two until he gave up and sprinted away. I never saw the birthday boy again, but I'll never forget his parting sound. The sound of cowboy boots furiously smacking the pavement. I don't know what the heck he was, but he was not human. And to that birthday boy, let's not celebrate together, ever.
Weird spooky story time. Glitch in the Matrix Reddit stories. This person says, first time posting here. So yesterday I came home in the afternoon with my power bank in my zipped pants pocket. Came inside, chilled for a bit, and went to sleep. Fast forward to today. I'm tearing through the house looking for my power bank. Checked my jacket, pants, couch, floor, under the cushions, even on top of the fireplace mantle multiple times. Nothing. Out of nowhere, it's right there on the mantle. Same exact spot I already checked. Like it reappeared out of thin air. No one touched it. I didn't move anything. It was literally invisible to me until I looked again. Here's another one. I've never really seen any glitches personally, but I had one this morning. I went to make eggs this morning and there was only one egg left in the carton in the middle, and I took it out and set it on the counter. I grabbed the other carton in the fridge because I wanted a couple more eggs. When I turned back to throw away the empty carton, I felt weight to it, and there was a second egg that somehow appeared on the far left of the carton, not even close to where the first egg was. I still ate both, though. Anyway, have thoughts on this? You in another timeline is wondering what happened to their egg. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about these stories. Or if you've had a glitch in the Matrix, send it my way.
Disturbing things are happening in and around Arizona's Grand Canyon National Park. Season guides vanish without a trace. Campers are driven from their tents in the dead of night. Tourists feel unseen eyes watching them from the trees. This episode will take you through 4 cases revealing the truth behind these experiences. A secret only recently revealed. I'm Josh Nanocchio. This is What Lurks Beneath. You won't want to miss this one. On September 2nd, 2006, a representative from the White Mountain Apache Nation stepped forward to share something with the public. Although her community's traditions and customs have kept this secret for generations, spokeswoman Colette Altaha said that the time had come to finally let the public know. Colette told Arizona's 3 TV news station that her people were not prone to easily talk to outsiders. In fact, because people doubting them before, most eyewitnesses never came forward. But now, Colette says that there have been more sightings than ever before. It cannot be ignored any longer. However, Colette isn't alone. Everyone else in the region has heard the rumors too, and over the years, those whispers have turned into first-hand sightings, both on and off the Fort Apache Indian Reservation. Colette's decision to speak publicly to 3TV was not made lightly. She even got some pushback from the community she represented. some members of the tribe voiced concerns over stepping forward, with some calling into the local radio station to say that this kind of exposure deliberately went against the wishes of their tribal elders. But Colette stood by her choice because she admitted that while she hasn't seen anything unusual herself, she grew up hearing stories all the time, and those stories came from people she loved and trusted. And even though she considers herself hard to convince, she'd heard enough to lead her to believe that those stories were in fact true. Tribal Police Lieutenant Ray Burnett supported Colette's announcement, and he said that admitting the truth was simply a matter of public safety. And he told reporters his officers often got calls from reputable citizens. You know, people who they weren't crazy or suffering from substance abuse or even making prank calls. So whatever is happening in the mountains, the silence that once surrounded it is beginning to break. And for the first time, the world is starting to listen. But what was Colette referring to? Well, the Fort Apache Indian Reservation sits around 200 miles from the north rim of the Grand Canyon, and in the American Southwest, that's practically next door. And the things that Colette warned the public about are directly related to some of the strange, disturbing things unfolding in the national park. At around 4 p.m. on June 2nd, 2015, 22-year-old river guide Morgan Heimer stood right near the Grand Canyon talking with the lead rafting guide of his group. The rest of the team was busy walking their boats back to the banks of the Colorado River, chatting and just laughing over the sound of rushing water in the background. Morgan and the lead guide were discussing how Morgan needed to take some time off that afternoon just to stretch his legs and clear his head. Well, at that moment, a client from the rafting group suddenly called over to the lead guide asking for help with something. The guide excused himself, telling Morgan that he'd be right back, and walked over to assist the client. The interruption couldn't have lasted more than a minute, but when the guide turned back around to resume his conversation with Morgan, Morgan was just gone. I mean, he literally vanished. The spot where he had been standing just moments before was completely empty. Now, knowing where this story is headed, this might sound alarming, but the guy didn't think much of it at first. I mean, after all, Morgan had just mentioned how he wanted to take a break, so he just figured Morgan had decided to take it early. But in reality, it was the last anyone would see of him. Morgan Heimer grew up in Cody, Wyoming, because his hometown was surrounded by wilderness. Morgan spent tons of time climbing, hiking, just exploring the outdoors as a kid and through his early adult years. He absolutely loved nature and became really adept at outdoor survival. He was also an experienced swimmer. And once he grew older, Morgan knew exactly what he wanted to do with his life. Although he majored in English at the University of Wyoming, he wanted to become a river guide. I mean, for a guy who loved the outdoors as much as Morgan did, getting paid to take people down beautiful rivers was basically a dream job. Eventually, he got hired by Tour West, who's a commercial rafting company that specialized in trips down the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. Morgan wasn't just working a job, he was living his passion every single day. But on May 27th, 2015, Morgan began leading what was supposed to be an 8-day rafting trip down the Colorado River. And for the first 6 days, everything went off without a hitch. The weather was perfect, the rapids were manageable for the group, and everyone involved was just having the time of their life. Especially Morgan, who was doing what he loved, guiding people through one of the most amazing natural wonders in the world. Then came June 2nd, the 7th day of the trip. That morning, the group packed up their overnight camp and continued their journey down the Colorado River. It was a day full of exciting pit stops, and by the early afternoon, they had reached a spot at mile marker 213 called Pumpkin Spring, where everyone oohed and ahed at the distinctive orange rock formation. And later that afternoon, with the sun beating down and a bunch of people in the group decided to go swimming in the Colorado River to cool off. For whatever reason, Morgan didn't join them. He stayed on shore, fully dressed in his river guide outfit, which was a dark-colored personal flotation device, a blue plaid long sleeve shirt, flip-flop sandals, a maroon baseball cap, and brightly colored shorts. He also had this purple water bottle with him that he carried pretty much everywhere. And it was right after this swimming break that Morgan had brief conversation with the lead guide near the river's edge. That was the last time anyone would ever see him. Now, as I said, people assumed he was taking a break because guides sometimes took a little time for themselves during these long trips. But when the sun started setting that evening and the group gathered for dinner on the riverbank, they noticed something. Morgan hadn't shown up. And as it got darker and Morgan still hadn't returned to camp, people began getting really concerned. At 7:26 p.m., someone in the group officially reported Morgan as missing. Now, the local park rangers didn't waste a moment. They immediately initiated search protocols. The next morning, as soon as there was enough light, search and rescue teams began combing the river where Morgan was last seen, between mile markers 211 and 215. They literally checked everything: the shorelines, the water itself, all the rocky areas, basically anywhere a person might go, hide, or fall. They had helicopters flying overhead in teams with search dogs on the ground, but an initial search of the area revealed nothing. So, determined to locate Morgan, search and rescue teams expanded the search downstream all the way to Diamond Creek. The teams interviewed every single person who had been on the trip, asking tons of questions about Morgan's behavior, if he had said anything unusual or if they noticed anything. I mean, anything at all that might offer a clue as to where he went. But despite these extensive interviews, officials couldn't find any useful information about what might have happened to Morgan. The search continued for 6 full days. Teams worked from dawn until dusk, looking not just for Morgan himself, but for literally any sign of him that might lead to his trail. Maybe a piece of his clothing, that purple water bottle, footprints in the sand, or signs of disturbance in the vegetation that might show where someone had passed through recently. But folks, they found nothing. There was not a single trace that Morgan had ever been there. After nearly a week of intense searching without the smallest clue to go on, authorities had no choice but to assume that Morgenheimer had most likely drowned in the Colorado River. But here's the thing. Everyone involved knew that Morgan was not only an accomplished swimmer, but that he had some serious outdoor skills. Like, unless he fell into some especially turbulent water, he wouldn't have just died from falling into the river. And if he was just lost somehow, he would have easily survived for a long time, long enough to be found. His disappearance simply defies all explanation. And sadly, to this day, Morgenheimer's body has never been found. No evidence has ever emerged that Morgan was even alive after that afternoon on June 2nd, 2015. The experienced river guide simply disappeared in the Grand Canyon, leaving behind nothing but questions about what really happened.
You know why something evil has to ask permission to come into your house? It sort of goes back to this old belief that nothing evil, nothing negative can enter into your life, can enter into your home unless you give it permission. See, we naturally have this protective barrier surrounding us. Some people call it guardian angels. Some people call it, a protective spirit. But we are naturally protected from these sort of things. But these evil, these negative entities try and break us down and get us to open that space, to allow them to come in. And so our homes, where we live, where we love, where we share intimate moments, right? That becomes a protective space. And this evil entity cannot enter through that doorway until you give it permission. Now, this story comes out of North Carolina. There was this woman who said when she was a young girl, she grew up in a small home up in the Appalachian Mountains. And she said when they first moved into this house, she remembers at night hearing what sounded like young children out in the woods laughing and saying things and calling her to come outside. And she would see shadows moving across her window like someone was walking around out there. She just ignored it, and she really had no idea what was going on. And she had heard stories, she had heard rumors from friends, that if anything evil comes to your door or invites you outside, do not listen to them, do not follow. Well, this one particular night, her parents left her in charge of watching her brothers and sisters. And she said they were running around the house playing when all of a sudden she got kind of this sick feeling in her stomach, like something was wrong. And she said her brother started screaming and started freaking out and crying. And she's like, what's going on? Like, what's wrong? And he says, they're coming for us. Like, they're going to get us. They're coming. And she's like, what are you talking about? Who's coming? And he just kept saying, like, they're coming. And all of a sudden they hear boom, 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 like a knock at the front door. So she runs over to the window and she looks out, and she said at the front door was this young boy, with an old-timey haircut and wearing sort of like this blue jacket and blue pants with these like black boots. And she said he just looked out of place. She knew something was wrong. So she calls out to him from behind the door. Yes, like, what do you want? What do you need? And she said this boy responded, please let me in. Please let me in. And she's like, no, I'm not supposed to open the door. Mom and Dad are gone. Like, I can't open the door for you. And he's like, please, it's cold. Let me in. And she said, no, you're going to have to go somewhere else. I'm not opening the door. And right as she says that, the lights in the house started to flicker. And she said she took her brothers and sisters. They ran into their mother's room and she closed the door and they all just started praying. And finally their parents got home and they felt safe again. And she said within a couple weeks, it was all over this town that there was a young kid who disappeared. And she felt like that had something to do with whoever was knocking on the door then.
On September 29th, 2015, a tropical storm named Joaquin was swirling off in the Atlantic, and forecasters were having a hard time determining how big it was going to be, how fast it was going to be, and where it was going to end up. On shore, 53-year-old Captain Michael Davidson was struggling too. He was supposed to pilot his enormous cargo ship, the El Faro, from where he was in Florida all the way out to Puerto Rico, a 2,600-mile journey that would put he and the rest of his 32-person crew directly in the path of this storm. The year before, Davidson had been passed over for a promotion for a younger, more tech-savvy captain. And so now Davidson felt like he had something to prove. As he looked out over the calm water and the clear sky, he made a fateful decision. Every agency out there was telling him to not set sail until the storm had passed. But with 37 years of experience, Davidson felt differently. He felt like he could outrun this storm. Feeling suddenly motivated and confident, Davidson boarded the El Faro, hopped on the intercom, and informed his crew that they would not be waiting out the storm. Instead, they would be sailing right by it. As El Faro cast off her lines and headed southward, the governors of New Jersey, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Maryland all declared states of emergency. As the sound of El Faro's diesel engine faded over the horizon, cyclone warnings and hurricane warnings went up around the Bahamas. Schools on the islands began closing, flights were grounded, and cruise ships were diverted. Residents of one island were ordered to evacuate, and on another, police forcibly removed every occupant on this island as floodwater rose. But the first few hours of El Faro's journey were totally uneventful. But as they got closer and closer to the storm, the wind picked up and the waves grew dramatically. By nightfall, the ship was rocking so aggressively side to side that it made sleep almost impossible. By the following morning, the rain was so intense, the visibility was basically zero, and the waves were now so massive that none of the crew dared go out on the deck in fear of being swept overboard. The ship's navigator told Captain Davidson that he thought the storm was a lot worse than they were expecting, and that they should really consider turning around before it was too late. Davidson and the navigator were not the only ones up on the bridge, which is where the ship is actually steered from. There was also a black box that was anchored up on the wall behind them that recorded all of the conversations that happened up there. And the black box would record increasingly anxious conversations between the crew and Davidson as they voiced their concerns about the storm. But Davidson was totally unfazed. He was adamant that the storm was not going to get any worse than what they were seeing right then and there. And even if it did get worse, they were never going to be actually in the storm's eye, and so they weren't in any real danger. But to reassure his crew, he ordered his navigator to make a slight right so everybody on board saw they were taking a wider berth around the storm. One of the crew members, a 34-year-old woman named Danielle Randolph, was not reassured by this slight right. She was a hard worker from a military family and always followed orders, but she just could not understand why Davidson was not taking the storm seriously. And so that evening, after the sun had set, Danielle very carefully stumbled her way up the stairs to the navigational bridge because the ship is still rocking violently side to side. And when she got up there, she thought she would just check the weather for herself. The black box anchored to the wall recorded her discovery. The El Faro was not going to sidestep the storm. It was sailing directly into it. You can hear the fear and surprise as Danielle turns to Davidson and says, "We're sailing right through the eye." There was a silence on the recording as Davidson must have looked down at the computer screen that Danielle had pulled up to show him the storm and their course that was going right into it. And Davidson, after he realized his mistake, has this very eerily calm tone where he says to the navigator, okay, I need you to make another slight right. And he assured everybody on the bridge that that would be enough, that that would fix this mistake. But Danielle was not buying it. And so as professionally and respectfully as she could, she says to her captain, this is a really bad idea. We really need to turn around right now. It's getting to the point where it's going to be too late and we won't be able to turn around. But Davidson wasn't having it. And so he told Danielle and the navigator and the other people on the bridge that they were not in danger, that everything's just fine. This is just like the storms he had been through when he used to work in Alaska, and they would get through this one too. 63-year-old Kurt Kaiser was a farmer who had a knack for finding clever ways to keep his machinery up and running on his 1,500-acre hog farm in Nebraska. In the winter of 2019, when the ground was frozen solid, Kurt was having a hard time putting his fill bin underneath his grain auger, and so he did what he did best. He improvised. A grain auger is this large rotating metal screw that transports grain from one place to another. And so the way this works is imagine this big tube where in the middle of it is this big rotating metal screw. And so the grain gets sucked in on one side, it rotates its way all the way through to the other end of the auger, and it's spit out the other. And because the auger is basically a giant rotating blade and the entry point is actually exposed, there's this big safety grate that's on the outside to make sure the only things getting sucked into the auger are really small, things like grain. Kurt realized if he removed the safety screen, he could easily fit the fill bin underneath. And so he did that, and he told himself that he would just replace the safety screen as soon as he was done. But it turned out, once that safety screen was gone, the machine actually worked a lot better. And after a couple of days of operating the auger without the screen, he just kind of forgot about it. Fast forward a few months to April 19th, 2019, and Kurt needed to move some grain from one bin to another. And so he fired up the auger that still did not have the safety screen on the outside of it. And as he was walking right near the entrance to the auger, he tripped and he fell feet first into the opening of the auger. And right away, his left foot got sucked up into the rotating metal screw. And before he'd even fallen back onto the ground, he could tell his left foot had been cut clean off. But that wasn't the worst of it, because the rest of his leg was still getting pulled into the shaft. That screw was going to keep on turning, and he could not get to the turn-off switch. And so he immediately starts fumbling for his phone, and he realizes he doesn't have it on him. He left it in the shed. And so he's got no way to call anyone. There's no one anywhere near him. No one's going to hear him scream. And so Kurt's looking around, wondering what he's going to do as he can feel himself being pulled closer and closer to the machine. But in that moment, the adrenaline was so high for Kurt that he felt no pain. He only had one thought: survive. Kurt realized he had his pocket knife. He always carried it with him. He pulled it out. It was a 4-inch blade, and he realized he could cut his leg off. But he had to time it right. If he didn't cut through fast enough, the auger would rotate all the way around and would pull more of his leg, the area he was cutting, into the auger. So he'd have to start all over again. And so he watched the rotating screw until he could clearly see a break in his leg, and he timed it so he reached down and cut through his leg as fast as he could right before the rotation of the auger caught up again. And as soon as he cut through, he fell backwards, rolled onto his stomach, and began army crawling all the way 200 meters back to his shed, where he pulled himself up inside, he got his phone, and he called his son, and he very calmly told him that he had his leg cut off in the auger. Kurt was soon airlifted to a hospital where doctors were able to perform a real amputation on him. For a little while after his accident, Kurt was a celebrity. He was all over the news. But apparently, he just did not care at all about that. All he wanted to do was put a prosthetic on and go back to work. And sure enough, only a few weeks after having his leg ripped off by an auger, he was back out working on an auger with a prosthetic leg.
This woman is one of the most hated people in America right now. This is Shanda Vanderarch, and her court case has been in the news a lot lately because she's being recognized as one of the most notoriously depraved mothers in history. The lawyers in this case have even said it's the most difficult case they've ever worked on. So let's talk about this story. Just a reminder that I tell a lot of dark, true crime stories on this channel, so viewer discretion is advised, but follow along if you want to hear more. So let's start with a little bit about Shanda Vanderarch. Shanda works as a judicial clerk. She was even in the process of becoming an attorney. She freelanced as a dog trainer, and she has 5 biological children. 3 of her children lived in Oklahoma with their dad, and she lived in Michigan with her 2 other children. She got remarried to a man named Adam, and he was the stepdad to their 2 children. But then 2 things happen that kind of turn her into a monster. In early 2021, she got a call from her husband saying that she needed to resume the care for their 15-year-old son, Timothy. Timothy had special needs.
He's reported as having high-functioning autism, ADHD, bipolar disorder, and several other conditions. Apparently, Timothy's biological father was unable/unwilling to care for him and said if Shanda didn't take him, he was going to submit him over to, state child services. So they relocate Timothy back to Shanda's care, so she is now caring for her 3 biological children. But then the second thing happens that really causes the wheels to fall off in her life. Her husband, Adam, has a stroke. And it's significant enough for him to have to move out of the house with his parents so that they can take care of him. So Shanda Vanderarch found herself as a single mom who works 2 jobs. One of her kids has special needs, and I think she really hated her life. Correction, I think she really hated her son Timothy. She never expressly says so, but in all of her testimony and text messages, you can tell that she really dislikes and resents that she has to care for him. So let's talk a little bit about her son Timothy, because it's his profound mistreatment that she's on trial for. Timothy only lived with his mother for 1.5 years, but things started to get terrible really quickly. Like I said, Timothy had some mental health disorders that required some additional help, and I guess it could cause some disruptive behavior. But in the time that Timothy stayed with his mother, Shanda Vanderarch didn't take him to a doctor, didn't let him go to school, and didn't let him go outside. No, Shanda Vanderarch decided to take matters into her own cold-blooded hands, took away Timothy's human rights, and turned her home into a prison. Shanda Vanderarch is an evil mother. Let's talk a little bit about how she ran her house. This is Shanda's oldest son, Paul. He worked as a dishwasher at Applebee's, and he and Shanda had opposite schedules, so one of them was always at home caring for the kids. I use the term care loosely. So Shanda claimed in court that her son Timothy was sneaky and deceitful. Like he would wake up in the middle of the night, could get loud. But the things that seemed to piss her off the most was him being sneaky and deceitful, especially sneaking food. Shanda made the decision to block Timothy's access to food by putting locks on the freezer, the fridge, and the pantries. Now, it's in every animal's biology not to let ourselves starve. People have gone so far as to eat leather and tree bark just to satiate their hunger. Sometimes Timothy managed to break in to get food. But just to show you how desperate he was for food, the things he were eating were awful. Shanda said he once ate a 2-pound bag of frozen chicken nuggets while they were still frozen, and an entire pound of raw hamburger. It was a cycle he couldn't win because he was starving, so he had to steal food, but then he'd be punished. Timothy's punishments were exceptionally sadistic. First off, Timothy had a bunk bed that he shared with Paul, but like some demented version of Harry Potter, they forced him to sleep in a closet under the stairs that they referred to so lovingly as the small room. Put cameras and motion detectors everywhere in the house to monitor his movement constantly. He had to sleep there. Blue tarp is his blanket. And he was forced to spend hours of his time on his knees with his arms over his head as punishment if he ate something. If Timothy had to use the washroom, he was timed. He was given 2 minutes maximum, otherwise he was in adult diapers the whole time. Another form of punishment was that he was force-fed bread soaked in hot sauce. This is not regular hot sauce, this is like liquid fire. This would be the last sauce they use in Hot Ones. Sometimes they'd just pour the hot sauce straight into his mouth. Side note, in court, Shanda Vanderarch claimed that Timothy loved hot sauce, so it had to be hot enough to make sure that he actually felt it. She's such a piece of shit. Other forms of punishment included being forced to run up and down the stairs for hours while being chased by Paul, and he would be forced to sit in ice baths. And his hands would be bound in there because, per Shanda's words, he wouldn't want him to be too comfortable. By this point, Timothy is so weak and malnourished he can't stand up on his own, and his brother Paul even said he looked skeletal. Which brings us to the final chapter in this story. Shanda Vanderarch's son, Timothy, was found unresponsive July 6th, 2022. He was 15 years old and he only weighed 69 pounds. Timothy stopped breathing and passed away by himself in the small room. So Shanda calls 911, and when the police arrive, Shanda tells them that Timothy had been on a hunger strike, and it had gone horribly wrong, and they just found him like this. But as the investigation progressed, there was so much damning evidence that revealed that she was very aware of what was happening in the house, and she was the one driving the ship. And that her son Paul was really the enforcer of her will. Paul pled guilty to the charges against him, and he decided to fully cooperate and testify against his mother. And his position on why he did this was basically that he was following orders. He likened it to something like Stockholm Syndrome, and that he just wanted to please his mom, and that maybe he just didn't love his brother enough. Shanda Vanderarch did take the stand, and her defense is pretty unbelievable. Her main defense was that she just didn't remember doing those things. That was because she had a number of mental ailments, like OCD and sensory processing disorder, but mostly PTSD following her husband's stroke. And that would cause her to have blackouts in her recall ability. She also blamed her son Paul for a lot of it too. Probably the most noteworthy moment in this trial is when she pretends to dry heave when they show her a picture of Timothy's body the day before he passed away. She really is ridiculous. They also had to stop court when she claimed she was having a panic attack when they were reading the text exchange between her and Paul, because apparently she didn't remember saying any of those things. Shanda Vanderarch was found guilty of murder. The jury only deliberated for an hour. She's been sentenced to life in prison. This really is one of the most horrific cases of child neglect and mistreatment I've ever heard. Her family will never be the same again. She ruined 2 of her sons' lives, except one lost his life and the other is damaged for life. She absolutely deserves to spend the rest of her life in prison. Thank you for sticking around. I know this was a long story. I'm going to leave you with a moment of Shanda Vanderarch's testimony that seems to sum up this case really well.
Ms. Vanderarch, isn't it true? Timothy had just become nothing more than an annoyance for you, and he wasn't even a human being in your eyes anymore.
That is absolutely not true.
She was missing for years until an episode of Unsolved Mysteries aired. It was the summer of 2017 in Illinois. 9-year-old Kayla Unhorn was a very kind, sweet, but shy girl. She never made a fuss about anything. She was very, very reserved, very well behaved. And she was treasured by her dad, Ryan. Now, Ryan had originally met Kayla's mum, Heather, back in 2003. They hit it off straight away, had a totally normal relationship. A few years later, Heather fell pregnant with Kayla, and the pair were happy about it. They planned a future together. They were really excited and they were like, right, as soon as Kayla is born, we'll get married. So you can imagine how blindsided Ryan was when the mum gave birth to Kayla and all of a sudden wanted nothing to do with Ryan. She just ended it and Ryan was heartbroken. But he was like, we'll have to make joint custody work for the sake of Kayla. You know, he adored his little girl. Eventually, as the years went on, he did move on with a woman called Lisa, and he regularly saw his little girl. But then Heather pulled the rug from underneath him yet again. It was like, me and Kayla are moving house to Georgia. Now, Georgia to Illinois is not just down the road. This is thousands of miles away. So he went to court. He was like, do you know what? We're going to need something like legally in writing. I'm not going to let you just remove her from my life. And even though the court did side with him and they did put an agreement in place, Heather didn't follow it. And suddenly, without warning, one day when she was supposed to drop Kayla off to Ryan, the pair of them vanished, mum and daughter, into thin air. And Ryan obviously had a hunch that Heather was responsible, but absolutely nobody could track her down anywhere. I can't imagine how powerless and how terrified he must have felt. He never gave up hope. He would tell anybody that he could about his missing daughter. He was trying to get the news out. He was trying anything to try and trace her. And that's why I personally find true crime content so helpful. People are interested in these stories, and for that reason we have TV shows like Unsolved Mysteries. This means people can share their stories and get answers. And in this case, it helped reunite this man with his baby. Now, the series Unsolved Mysteries covered Kayla's case on an episode, and a true crime girlie just happened to see the episode. On an evening in May 2023, an employee at a clothing store in Westgate Regional Shopping Center in North Carolina rang police. She'd seen this girl in the shop with her mum and immediately recognized her from that broadcast. broadcast. The program had shown an age progression picture. She was like, oh my God, that looks like this girl. Police showed up and they were like, oh my God, you absolutely did the right thing. This is the missing child. They arrested Heather for kidnap, and Ryan drove to North Carolina with tears in his eyes, about to reunite with his daughter. Heather was given a few years in prison, I believe, not long enough in my opinion, and Ryan and his wife got full custody of Kayla. He's around 17, 18 and is apparently thriving, living a totally normal teenage girl life.
This story is absolutely wild. A woman keeps her lover in her attic for about 14 years, and her husband had no idea, but then something tragic happens in this story. You are not going to believe this story. So we are in LA, California in the year 1922 when police are called to the home of the Osterreichs. They have found Mr. Osterreich deceased on the living room floor, but then they heard a woman screaming upstairs. They find Walburga, or she goes by the name Dolly, locked inside of a closet. So they found the key on a table right next to the closet door and let her out. She had claimed that her and her husband came home from a party about 2 hours prior. She was putting her coat up when someone pushed her into the closet and locked her inside. She thought it was her husband playing a trick on her. So she's, yelling, Fred, let me out. But then all of a sudden she hears a firearm go off. Where Fred's body was found, there were signs of a struggle. He had been hit twice in the chest and once in the head. They also found a bullet in the ceiling and found some casings from a .25 caliber pistol. On Fred's body, they noticed he has a chain where he has a pocket watch, but the pocket watch was missing. And apparently his wife had gave it to him as a gift, and this was very valuable and it had diamonds around it. Fred and his wife Dolly are originally from Milwaukee, and he owns a factory where they make aprons, and he decided to expand his business. So he moved some of his business from Milwaukee to LA, and he was worth about $500,000 in the 1920s, so that's about $7 million in today's money. So according to Dolly, there have been previous attempted break-ins, and some things were taken, like some money and some steaks from the icebox. And then Fred had noticed some unusual sounds in the home. So when police searched their home, it seemed like nothing valuable was taken. Even Fred's wallet was still on him. The only thing that was missing was his pocket watch, which they thought was very odd. So the theory is there's possibly more than one suspect, and they came home to a burglary in progress. So while they're putting Dolly in the closet upstairs, one other person is struggling with Fred, ends up, firing that firearm at him, and then they get spooked, and then they just take that pocket watch and just flee. So the neighbors did confirm that there was multiple attempts of break-ins, and one neighbor did hear a firearm go off and then a woman screaming, "Oh, Fred." And then she saw a shadow go out to the backside of the house, and then 15 to 20 minutes later, all the lights in the house went out. Police are kind of looking into Dolly as a suspect. It's possible she had some help or she has a secret lover. But according to people that knew her, they never saw her with another man and didn't think she was having an affair. And also Fred, he was not having an affair either. He was working constantly and wouldn't have time to have an affair. Police end up speaking with one of Fred's plant managers from Milwaukee and asked, how was he as a boss? And he stated, not a lot of people liked him. He was a heavy drinker and he was very hard on his employees. But there's a reason. He had lost his son at a very young age, 10 years prior, and he was trying to cope with the loss of his son. So to keep his mind off of it, he would drink and just constantly work. Now, Dolly, on the other hand, she was, very loving to the employees. She considered them, like her children, like, she wanted to care for somebody and was really there for them. Fred would even hire ex-cons to try to help them get back on their feet. But he does recall a man named Edward Flute that did have some problems with Fred. But police were not able to find Edward. And back then, you could basically fall off the face of the earth because they didn't even have photo IDs really in the 1920s. But eventually there's a detective that runs into an attorney named Mr. Shapiro and notices that he has a pocket watch, the exact same one that was found missing at the crime scene. So according to Mr. Shapiro, he claims he got that pocket watch as a birthday gift from Dolly. He does admit that they are romantically involved, but he had no idea that this was the only item missing from the crime scene. He stated it was just a gift from Dolly. He had no idea. So police end up speaking with Dolly and asking about the pocket watch, and she said, at first I thought it was stolen from the scene, but then I found it in the couch cushion, so it was not stolen. Dolly never had any contact with Mr. Shapiro until months after her husband's homicide. Police are looking into Dolly, and it turns out she is now dating a movie producer named Ray Klum. Ray actually knows Dolly and also Fred. They were very close together and they knew each other in Milwaukee. So police speak with Ray, and Dolly had asked him to do a favor. Just a few days after the crime, she gives him a package stating you needed to get rid of it, and it was an outline, he believes, of a firearm. So Ray ends up throwing this package in the tar pits, which is basically a big pond with hot tar, so anything you throw in there is going to disappear. But thankfully they got lucky and he didn't throw it far enough, and it was on the edge of the tar pits. And what did they find in that package was a .25 caliber pistol. According to Dolly, she had found this weapon a few days after the crime and she wanted to get rid of it because they would think she was a suspect. So that's when she asked Ray to get rid of it. So they decided to arrest her on homicide. But there's still one question. Dolly was found in a closet that was locked from the outside. So they are trying to figure out, is it possible that she locked herself inside? So they tried, for a long time, and there was no way she was able to lock herself inside that closet. So they did not have any evidence against her, so they had to let her go. 5 years after the crime, Mr. Shapiro decides to come to the DA's office, and he has information about this case. So he went to visit Dolly while she was in jail, and she asked an odd request if he could go to the store and get groceries for someone that was living in her home in the attic, and it was her half-brother. So he did this request for her. He got the groceries, and he was supposed to scratch on the attic door 3 times, letting her half-brother know it was him. So he did that, and he came out, and he stated, "My name's Otto." And, he's asking, "Are you her half-brother?" And he stated, "No, I'm actually her lover." Dolly first met Otto in the year 1911. He was an orphan and a teenager, and he was working at the factory where her husband works, repairing sewing machines. And eventually she took a liking to him and asked him to come to her house and repair her sewing machine. And that's when that started this affair. Otto and Dolly were having relations about 8 to 10 times a day, and he was coming over a lot, and she was afraid the neighbors would talk, seeing Otto come in and out of the house. So she came up with the idea for him to live in her attic. But eventually Fred was expanding his business and they were going to move to the West Coast. So she decided to have Otto follow her. So he ended up staying in her attic in California for the next 4 years. So altogether, he was living in her attic over 14 years. Fred had a feeling that something was going on in his home. He could hear movement in the house, noticed that leftovers were, taken, but Dolly was convincing him that he was just crazy and he was just working long hours and it was just in his mind. So Otto ended up telling Mr. Shapiro that there had been attempted break-ins in the home. So when Fred and Dolly went out, he would be kind of the bodyguard for the house, and he did have a firearm. So that night of the crime, he heard them come home, and it turns out Fred and Dolly were arguing, and he was really afraid that Fred was going to hurt Dolly. So Otto ends up coming downstairs to confront Fred, and he finds that Dolly is on the ground. And eventually, Fred comes and attacks Otto. I'm not quite sure if he recognized him or not, because he did work for him. So, Otto was afraid that Fred was going to take his life or beat him, so he took that firearm and ended up firing multiple times in self-defense. So then Dolly and Otto stage the scene, and then he locks Dolly in the closet, leaves the key right next to the door so the police can let her out, and he just hides up in the attic. I don't know why the police didn't even search the attic, but he was hiding up there the entire time the police were there. So Otto had no place to go, so he just stayed in the attic, but once Dolly was arrested, he knew the gig was up. So Mr. Shapiro actually helped him get out of the house, and Otto moved to Canada and eventually got married. So they wanted to charge Otto with manslaughter, but there was a statute of limitations in California at that time for manslaughter. The statute was only 3 years, and it had been 8 years since this crime had happened. So they could not charge him, and he was let go. Dolly was put on trial too, but they really had no evidence against her. The only thing she did wrong was having an affair. So there was a hung jury, and it had to be a mistrial, so she was eventually let go as well. So nobody got charged for this crime. Dolly did eventually marry that movie producer Ray, and she died in the year 1961 when she was 81 years old. It just seemed like everybody in this story was not happy. Dolly, her husband was working a lot, and she wanted, someone to be there for her. So that's when Otto came in. Otto was an orphan. He never had a mother figure, never knew his parents. So Dolly kind of became that mother figure, but again, he was having relations with her, which is disturbing. And then, Fred, he was so depressed about losing his son. So to cope with it, he would drink a lot, and he was just working all the time. This was just a mess from the beginning. I mean, this story is absolutely wild. I cannot believe he stayed in her attic for that many years because he didn't want anybody to find out they were having an affair. But this story was just absolutely wild, and unfortunately, they will never get justice for Fred. But let me know what you guys thought of this story in the comments. Thanks for watching. I love you all. We'll see you in the next one, and please take care of yourselves. This story absolutely broke my heart, and I believe it is not the mother's fault in this case. Even though she was the one that took the lives of her 2 infant daughters, I believe the husband should have been charged because it was mainly his fault on why she had did this crime. So bear with me here. The story may be disturbing to hear, so if you do not want to listen, I suggest you keep scrolling because this story is very, very sad and disturbing. We are in Alton, Illinois, and on April 29, 1989, police are called to the Sims home, which includes Robert and his wife Paula. According to Paula, she was taking out the trash about 10 p.m. when a masked man with a firearm forced her into the house and then knocked her unconscious in the kitchen. About 45 minutes later, Paula's husband comes home and he finds her unconscious in the kitchen. He eventually goes upstairs and finds that his toddler son Randy was okay, but his infant daughter Heather was missing. Upon searching the crime scene, the bassinet was completely undisturbed. There was no valuables taken from the home, so they're just wondering what had happened to Heather. All of the leads the police were getting were dead ends. There was no ransom demand. There was no affair going on between Paula or Robert, so they're wondering why did this person target the Sims? 4 days later, a man was fishing on the Mississippi River on the Missouri side. When he went to throw something in this trash bin here, when he noticed a black trash bag in it, he said it looked kind of suspicious, so he kind of grabbed it and opened it, and he found the remains of a young girl, and it turned out it was Heather's remains, and they were very well preserved. The autopsy confirmed on Heather that there was 3 small vertical cuts underneath her lip. They did not find any signs of bruising. There was no puncture wounds, no signs from a firearm, so they concluded this was not sudden infant death syndrome, and this was no accident. Whoever had done this to her had put their mouth over her nose and her mouth and suffocated her. They also concluded that her body was put in a freezer face down, and then eventually her body was taken to that trash bin and she was face up, and she was either placed there the morning of or the night prior to when the body was found. Police are looking into Paula and Robert Sims, and Robert made a disturbing comment right after his daughter was kidnapped. He made a statement to the FBI stating that him and his wife Paula had the longest and best relations they have had in a very long time. That is very disturbing if you ask me. They find out that the Sims had another daughter 3 years prior named Lorelei who had the exact same story. She was kidnapped by a masked man, and then eventually her body was found. Her skeletal remains were found scattered all across behind the Sims home. But these remains were scattered by animals, and they could not prove that Robert or Paula had anything to do with her homicide. So according to Paula, this masked intruder did some karate chop move or something like that to the back of her neck, and that made her go unconscious for 45 minutes. But according to the medical examiner who did the autopsy on Heather, she's also a professional in neuroscience. She stated that there's no way possible that a person doing that move would make you unconscious. They did end up finding shoe prints right around the trash bin, but it did not match to any of the shoes found in the Sims' home. So they decided to examine the trash bag that Heather's body was found in. So they got the box from the trash bags that were in the Sims' home with the first unused trash bag. They were able to compare the dye marks from the trash bag that Heather was found in to the first unused in the box, and it did match. So that trash bag came from the Sims' home. Robert and Paula had a very odd marriage. So after the birth of their first daughter, Lorelei, Paula and Lorelei were supposed to sleep downstairs in the basement while Robert stayed upstairs. So they slept in completely separate rooms. But after their daughter had passed away, Paula was able to sleep with her husband, Robert, back upstairs. So a short time later, Paula gave birth to their son, Randy, and then about a year or so later, they had their daughter, Heather. And Paula made a comment to her roommate in the hospital stating that her husband, Robert, really only wants boys. Robert absolutely adored his son, Randy, but his daughter, Heather, on the other hand, he seemed to have no interest in her. So after Paula gave birth to their daughter, Heather, she and Heather had to sleep in the living room while Robert and Randy slept upstairs. It appeared that Robert did not want Paula sleeping in the same bed with him while they had a daughter in the home. So that's when Paula decided to take the life of her own daughter, Heather. So that day, Paula had taken her hand and suffocated her own daughter. She then put her body in the trash bag, then took her body to her parents' house and put her in the freezer. She went back to her home, make it look like she was knocked unconscious so her husband would find her, and then her daughter would just end up missing. But then her parents found out that their granddaughter is missing, so they decided to come home early from vacation. And then Paula's like, well, I've got to get rid of her body. So she takes her body from the freezer, puts her in that dumpster bin near the river, and then just leaves her body there. So Paula was arrested and charged with first-degree homicide, and she was sentenced to life in prison. But I believe she was out on parole after serving 30 years and was released in the year 2019, and Robert was never charged with any crime. But the detectives working on this case still say it's an open investigation, and they will not forget him just in case they need to arrest him, but they had no evidence to charge him. If you ask me, I believe Robert should be charged with something, because when the detectives searched the Sims home, they had pictures of their son all over the house. There was no pictures of either daughter in the home. It was like they didn't even exist or even cared about their daughter. Now, I believe Robert should have been charged in this case instead of Paula, because it's mainly his fault. He would not let his wife sleep in the same bed with him. Like, once his own daughter was kidnapped, they had the best relations that they've ever had, which is absolutely disturbing. But then, once the daughter was in the home, he would not allow her to sleep with him. So Paula, she felt like she had no other choice because she couldn't even sleep in the same bed as her husband. So she had to take the lives of her two daughters just to make him happy. He's the one that should be charged. It's absolutely disturbing if you ask me. But if it wasn't for that fisherman, getting curious and looking in that trash bag, this case probably would have never been solved and she would have gotten away with 2 homicides. But I don't know if 1989, if postpartum depression had a lot of research on it. So that could have been a factor as well. But I believe Robert should have been charged in this case. They still say this case is open in case they do want to charge Robert if they have more evidence, but they don't at this time. But I believe he is the only reason why Paula did this. If, he said if he paid, any attention to his daughters, they would still be alive today. It just breaks my heart. But Robert should be in jail for the rest of his life. But let me know what you guys thought of this in the comments. Thanks for watching. I love you all. We'll see you in the next one. And please take care of yourselves.
You can't make this stuff up. Might have known the story of real-life boogeyman.
She was stolen out of this donut shop 40 years ago, and her killer still remains at large. Hello, true crimers. This is the case of Jennifer Day. Viewer discretion is advised. This case will take us to Dallas, Texas. Jennifer Lee Day was born on June 30th, 1970, and she lived her entire life in the Dallas, Texas area. Unfortunately, her life was not very long. She was a sweet, innocent kid who was actually just about to start high school, someone who was very intelligent, who always got good grades. Jennifer was described as someone who just truly loved life, and she just looked forward to every day. But sadly, she would not make it to 15 years old. Jennifer, at the age of 14, got a job working at a place called Preston Donuts. And yes, it was very common back at that time frame for 14, 15-year-olds to have jobs. Yes, it was a thing that they would sometimes work alone. Again, it's significantly different times than it is today. But that is what she was doing on June 23rd, 1985. Jennifer would get up that morning and she would get to work about 5:30 in the morning. When she spoke on the phone from the donut shop to the donut shop's owner, that was at 5:35 a.m. A customer came in at approximately 6:20 a.m. They had an interaction with Jennifer. She seemed like her normal self, friendly and bubbly. Then 15 minutes later at 6:35 a.m., another customer comes in, but this time there's no one behind the counter. The customer calls out to see if anyone can come to the counter, but no one comes. They can see a purse on the counter, and eventually the donut shop owner was contacted, which then they realized that when they got there, Jennifer wasn't there. She was nowhere to be found, but all of her belongings were there. There were no signs of any kind of struggle, no sign of a crime scene, and the cash register was still closed, and when they opened it, everything was still in it. Nothing was stolen. Jennifer had cash and jewelry in her purse. None of that was taken. The only thing missing was Jennifer. So she is reported missing, the police are contacted, and everyone begins their search. Police would hear from a witness who was actually across the street from the donut shop when at 6:32 a.m. they saw a man, an older man, getting into a vehicle with a younger blonde girl, and then the car takes off. And police believe that what this person saw was Jennifer being abducted, that she was being put into that car against her will. And sadly, their belief that she was abducted and not a runaway became reality 3 days later. There was an excavation crew doing some work nearby a construction site when in a field they came across a body of a young girl. She was nude and there was blood all over her. And so obviously they called police. Police do confirm that this is a murdered young child. She had been stabbed to death. She was 14-year-old Jennifer Lee Day. Jennifer, like I said, was found nude, but I don't see any mentions of whether or not she was raped. Judging by how she was found, I have to assume there was some kind of sexual motive here. But I don't know for sure, and I don't know if they have any male bodily fluid as DNA. They know the motive wasn't robbery because nothing was stolen. And the only real information they have was that this witness at 6:32 a.m. saw an older male getting into a car with what they presume is Jennifer, and it's a dark-colored car. I know they've dusted for fingerprints and did all the forensic testing that was available in 1985. And I have read that they do want to see if they can do anything with DNA at this point, like retest all of the evidence they had from the donut shop or with Jennifer's body or near her body that they collected to see if maybe they can get DNA from any of that would reveal potentially who the killer was. The most recent update is in about July or August of 2025, but it's really not much of an update. The update really is just more about having new detectives and reopening this case as a cold case to see what they can get. Someone stole this child out of her work, abducted her, and killed her, and left her body in a field. Why? They don't know. Who? They don't know. But somebody somewhere out there does know the truth. The killer may have said something to you. Maybe that killer is dead, or maybe they're just really far away from you now. Maybe you were afraid to come forward. Well, you can come forward now. Also, you can report information anonymously. You don't have to say who you are. They need to know who killed her. Her family needs to know that. Everyone in her life needs to know that. The police need to know that. And if there is a killer still at large, still roaming the streets out there, next to your kids, next to your family and loved ones, I'd like to think you would want that person behind bars. Someone somewhere out there knows the truth, and perhaps that someone is you. If you have any information, you can actually send a tip through email to policetips@plano.gov. You can also contact them at 972-424-5678. On a cold New York morning, a 14-year-old girl took a shortcut that unfortunately would lead to her murder. Hello, true crimer-ers. This is the case of Christine Defenbach. Viewer discretion is advised. Christine Ann Defenbach was born on May 15th, 1973, and at the time this case occurred, she and her family are living in the area of Queens, New York. Christine did have a younger sister. Her sister was 5 years old when this case occurred. Everyone would describe Christine as having a very old soul. She loved art and being creative. She had a lot of talent. She was considered to be pretty shy. She lived a pretty normal life. She had friends. She grew up in a really loving and caring household. And at the age of 14, Christine was a big fan of Wayne Newton. And she knew that there was going to be an article in the Parade magazine coming out on Wayne Newton that she wanted to read. So she wanted to go to the newsstand that she always went to get the newspaper to get that so that she could read it. Her father said yes, but also asked, try not to cross the railroad tracks. It's a shortcut that a lot of kids would take, the ones that she had taken before as well, to cut, diagonally across to get to the newsstand quicker. It was a really, really cold morning, and so getting to the newsstand faster would have been the better option. So Christine would leave her home, and then she would go to the newspaper stand. When she left, her dad told her, when you come back, we'll listen to the new Peter, Paul, and Mary album. She said, okay, great. She never got home. And after a short amount of time, knowing full well that she should have been home at this point, her father begins to look for her. And as he's doing so, he sees there's some police activity near the railroad tracks, near the shortcut that possibly Christine might have taken. When he approaches, he asks some of the detectives and the officers, what's going on here? And essentially they tell him that there is a body. He shows police a photo of Christine. They tell him it's her. 14-year-old Christine was dead. She had been severely beaten to death. Her skull was crushed. She had most of the blunt force trauma injuries were to her head. The coroner, I think, stated that there was no evidence that there was a successful rape, but they do believe that there was an attempted rape in this case. This is the area where her body was found. So right past this little building here would be the railroad tracks. Christine would have gone up these stairs to cut across the tracks, and after Christine's unfortunate death, they would end up blocking off that shortcut. Christine, pictured here with her younger sister, she had nothing stolen off of her. She did have money on her person, but it was like a few cents to get the newspaper. And so ultimately, I think they believe the motive was sexual in nature. I don't see any mention if they have for sure collected DNA from the crime scene. All I see in one article is that they are hoping that advanced DNA technology will help them uncover DNA, likely from her clothing or anything found near the crime scene. Now, early on, police did get some tips, and the tips were in reference to two men who their actual names haven't been released, but they were referred to as Tennessee and Cherokee. Tennessee and Cherokee were overheard at a bar, and so one of the people at the bar would come forward to police to tell them this information. But the people at the bar overheard them saying how they messed up a girl really bad. And they did this near the railroad tracks. So the tavern where this all happened was at Glenn's Tavern, where this was overheard. And then the murder scene is right here. That's where the home is where Christine lived, and that's where the newsstand she was heading to. So this would have been on those two men's direct path if they were walking down this way. They very likely could have run into Christine. The police have stated that those two men were found and they have been questioned. They were questioned really early on. They denied having any responsibility. And at that time, there just was no evidence to link them to this case, other than this conversation that was overheard, allegedly. But it sounds like there is some belief that both of these men, if not one of them, may have been responsible for what happened to Christine, because this conversation overheard at the bar sounded way too specific. But was that these two men boasting about something they didn't do? Were they joking in some really horrific, dark way? I mean, you need evidence to connect to Christine to determine who did this. And sadly, they do not have that evidence. And they are still hoping that someone somewhere out there knows the truth about who murdered Christine Defenbach. Perhaps that someone is you. You can report information anonymously. You don't have to say who you are. They just need to know what you know. If you have any information on the murder of 14-year-old Christine Defenbach, you are asked to please call 1-800-577-8477. Somebody has to know who hit her and then left her on the side of the road like she was garbage. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Karen Coglin. Viewer discretion is advised. This case will take us to an area called Sarnia, which is located in Ontario, Canada. That is where 14-year-old Karen Coglin lived with her family. The family lived here in this house, and Karen was actually one of 6 total siblings. Karen had just started high school, and she was an excellent student and very, very intelligent. She was kind and she was thoughtful. She knew how to make people laugh, and she had a love for animals. Her family says that Karen had this goal, this dream to eventually make the world a better place. She wanted to be a teacher. She wanted to work with kids. But at the core of everything, Karen was a kid, and she loved being with her friends. And she loved roller skating. And that's actually what she was doing the night this all happened. March 15th, 1974, Karen went to school like she did every day. Afterwards, she would head over to a friend's house where she hung out for a bit. Then after that, her and some friends went to the Rose Gardens roller rink, which is no longer in operation. They had a great time. They roller skated, they were just being kids, having fun. They left, I guess, around 11 p.m. or so, and then Karen had plans to stay the night at another friend's house. The friend was expecting Karen to get there sometime before 1 o'clock in the morning. Now, from what the reports say, there were a couple of friends who dropped Karen off at a friend's house, I guess another friend's house. This is a recreation. And these friends saw Karen walking towards the house. They drove away. This is the last time anyone ever saw Karen alive. But from what I understand, this is not the house Karen was supposed to be sleeping over at. And by the way, this was sometime around 1 o'clock in the morning. At 9:50 a.m. on now March 16th, 1974, there was someone driving down this road here where they noticed something on the side of the road. It was a person, and upon closer inspection, this was a child, and this person was deceased. And sadly, the remains would be identified as 14-year-old Karen Coglin. One of the stranger aspects of this is that, so this is where the Rose Gardens roller rink was, and then this is where Karen was last seen. This is the house where the friends dropped her off. Apparently the friend who she was supposed to be sleeping over at also lived in this area, but Karen's body is found all the way over here. I'm not sure if you can see it, but right, the little white boxes, that's where she was found. This was 22 kilometers away, which is roughly 13 miles away. So how on earth did she get way over there? Karen was fully clothed, but her coat and her shoes were found just a short distance away, kind of on the side of the road. And then several days later, so this is where her body was found, and now in this location there, right off of this, like right in this little ditch area, Karen's purse was found. How did it get there? So Karen, they believed she at the time was killed by some kind of blunt force trauma. They weren't sure if she had been sexually assaulted or not. There was no indications, however, that she was. Something else they found on her body were these small little paint chips. They were like a purpley type color. And that's when they eventually realized this wasn't like someone who had taken an instrument and beat Karen to death. She was hit by a car, which years down the road, after the autopsy is reviewed, they confirmed that she was actually struck and killed by a vehicle. This was a hit and run. The issue, though, is they don't know if Karen was hit right by where she was found, or was Karen hit elsewhere. Maybe she was still alive, put into this vehicle, maybe to take her to the hospital, but then maybe she dies en route to the hospital. And so then they take her out of the car and then dump her on the side of the road like she's garbage because they don't want to get in trouble. The point is they have no idea if this was something where she was deliberately hit by someone on purpose or if someone accidentally struck her. And then this is the area where her body was eventually found. It's just the distance of everything is also strange, because how on earth did she get 13 miles away from where she was last seen? The only explanation I can think of is that the person who hit her put her in their car. Because I don't know how Karen would have been walking that far, all the way, like just way far away, and how she did that. But based off of the paint chips, the color of the vehicle likely was some purplish color. They said that it may have been a 1970 to 1971 Chrysler, Plymouth, or Dodge product with metallic purple paint, commonly known back then as plum crazy purple. A paint color that was primarily used at that time on Chryslers. In a specific vehicle, it could have been a Barracuda, a Challenger, a Charger, a Dart, a Demon, Duster, or a Super Bee. That paint was also used on Chrysler's Belvedere, Coronet, Satellite, and Valiant models at the time. And just because no one deliberately took a blunt force object and struck it over her, killing her, someone still hit a full human being, a child, with their car and then left her. Even if they didn't put her into their car to take her to the hospital and she died en route, even if that didn't happen, you are still going to be well aware that you just struck a human being. This is murder. This is homicide. Sometimes people begin to go to this path of well, hit and runs. They don't ever call them murders, but it's a murder. You have killed a person with your car and you did nothing about it. And odds are you put that person into your car, they died, and then you dumped them on the side of the road. That is murder. There may have been damage to that car that would probably had to be repaired within days. The person who did this might be dead. They might also still be alive. This was 1974. Sure, 50 years ago, but the driver could have been a 20-year-old, and they're still in their 70s, maybe in their 80s. And if they're still out there, they deserve to be arrested and go on trial and go to prison. You don't get to take a human being's life, especially a child, and then just get away with it forever. Somebody somewhere out there knows the truth. Perhaps that someone is you. If you have any information on the murder of Karen Coglin, please call 1-519-882-1011. You can also report anonymously at 1-800-222-8477. A teenage boy was abducted right in front of his parents, and they were told there would be a ransom call. That never came. Hello, true crimer-ers. This is the case of Danny Goldman. Viewer discretion is advised. This story is going to take us down to Surfside, Florida. Danny Goldman was born on March 29th, 1948. Hey, we share the same birthday. And he was the only child to Aaron and Sally Goldman. Danny, pictured here in a younger photo with a couple of his friends, he grew up loving to work on electronics. He liked to fix TVs. Everyone just described him as just an all-around good kid. At the time this case occurred, he was a senior in high school and he had a girlfriend. And this is the house the Goldmans lived in Surfside, Florida. It was March 28th, 1966, one day before Danny's 18th birthday. At approximately 4:30 in the morning, an intruder entered the home through an unlocked sliding glass door. They woke up the family and addressed Aaron and Sally by their first names. And this intruder, described as a portly fella, demanded $10,000 in cash, which they said to them, "We don't have that here." So this intruder said, "Fine, I'm going to hold Danny, your son, as security for this money. We're going to call back with the ransom demand." And at gunpoint, he kidnapped Danny. His parents would never see him again. But that ransom call that they said was going to happen never happened. Obviously, the police were immediately notified and they would go to the house. They dusted the house for fingerprints, especially at the point of entry where the sliding glass door was. And they did find some prints there that did not match any of the Goldmans. But also in 1966, they didn't have this database where you can put it into a computer and find someone right away. And so because of the lack of any substantial clues, there was no ransom call. They had nowhere to go. The parents would go on the news pleading for their son's safe return. They sat there and waited and waited and waited, but nothing happened. And within 6 months, it seems that everyone in the police just seemed to kind of conveniently forget about all of this. It's almost as if it never even happened. It's almost as if Danny never existed to the police. But he did exist. This was a 17-year-old kid who was abducted at gunpoint. Danny's friends were obviously troubled and, saddened by their missing friend. And as they got older, they made promises to themselves that we're going to find out who did this to Danny. These are two of those friends. I think they're brothers, Joe and David Grobart. And then another sort of childhood friend is this guy here, Paul Novak, who would eventually become the mayor of Surfside. And then eventually after that, he became a lawyer. And it was kind of like armchair detectives who were solving this case. And they did. They solved it. The belief is that Danny was murdered the night he was taken. The friends who did a lot of research and a lot of work into this discovered that Danny's father, Aaron, was on the board of a bank. And what the friends would discover was that some of these banks had ties to the mob. Aaron didn't have ties to the mob, from what I understand, but the banks did. There were connections to Jimmy Hoffa, but also mainly this guy here, Santo Trapacante. He was a mob boss. They would learn that these banks that Aaron had been on the board of, they were being controlled by the mob. They were laundering money through these banks. And not only that, but they also had in their pockets police officers and detectives, including the officer or the detective who was immediately assigned the missing persons case of Danny. He was in the pocket of Trafficante. Hence why it seemed like everyone just forgot about Danny. Back at the house, police did also collect a fragment of a glove. That glove only was manufactured in one specific place and was only ever used in one particular hospital or clinic. And the friends would discover that at that clinic, a common patient there was this man here, George Defeis, or Defeis. Defeis is how you spell his last name. Well, he was a known associate of Santo Trafficante. His finger and palm prints were actually already on file because he had been arrested before, and many years down the road, all these fingerprints and palm prints were eventually all loaded into a computer database in which the fingerprint found on the sliding glass door of the Goldman house matched George here. It was his fingerprint. He was present in the house. He also fit the description of this kind of older, balding, portly man who had been the one to actually enter the home and take Danny. Well, George had another associate of the Trafficante crime organization that he worked with a lot, a man named Joe Chicken Cacciatore. So this group of investigators discovered that George and Joe had then taken Danny. They shot and killed him the night of his abduction, put him onto a boat, and then dumped his body into the Atlantic Ocean, where, unfortunately, if that's the case, he'll never be found. So what was the purpose of this abduction then? Why did they target them? Well, like I said, Aaron was on the board of these banks, and in the weeks and months leading up to this abduction, Aaron had been working with the FBI and essentially providing them testimony and evidence with regards to this potential money laundering situation and other illegal goings-on at the bank, potentially involving the mob. And literally days before the abduction, arrests were starting to be made. So the belief is that Aaron was targeted because of this. They never really planned to ask for a ransom. This was just about taking their son and killing him in retribution for what he was doing. Both Aaron and Sally passed away years before any of this came to light. They never knew what happened to their son, and they never knew who did it. I mean, maybe Aaron had suspicions, I don't know, but these friends who did all of this work, who were not police officers, would eventually work with the Miami-Dade Police Department, and collectively they announced all of this information. And this case is now believed to be solved. They know who took Danny, they know who killed them. The only remaining question is where exactly is Danny? But sadly, if they put him into the Atlantic Ocean all the way back in 1966, it's just impossible. They're not going to find him. And it was all because of the mob, police corruption, money laundering, you name it. And an innocent kid got caught in the crosshairs. A kid who had no knowledge of any of this. He just became an innocent victim. A victim who sadly will never be found and will also sadly never get justice.